Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I hope everybody is doing well. I'll be talking today a bit about my recent work that goes back a couple of years. Work on YouTube specifically, and I thought the way I want to present it is a bit in terms of how the project and the work has evolved and has led to the emergence of this term or concept platformed media system, which is really quite crucial, right? I mean, obviously, the term platforms is now used almost everywhere. But of course, the definitions have changed quite a bit. And when we look at Tim O'Reilly, who in 2005 talked about the web as platform, we can see that this has evolved quite a bit, and in a sense, the web has become one of several platforms that other platforms then build on, right? So that's this kind of movement that has been called platformization by quite a number of people, and well, one of the questions that I'm particularly interested in is on the one side, how do these platforms relate to questions of power in particular, but also how to study these platforms empirically, and this is something that I want to address today. Um, I mean, I can, of course, start with a whole series of definitions, and there's, I would say, almost something like a battle currently happening around platform definitions. But the way that I think about it here, within the context of this research, is simply as a large-scale infrastructure for exchange and communication that draws heavily on user contribution and then manages interaction and communication through what Poole and colleagues have called the three main factors: the interfaces, algorithms, and policies. Benjamin Bratton talked about platforms as setting the stage for actions to unfold through ordered emergence. And this ordered emergence is a bit what we are quite interested in the research project that I'm going to talk about today. And that also begs the question: what kind of order indeed emerges from platformization and then the platform life that is being instantiated online? I mean, I don't want to go into a whole story about platforms, kind of taking over, which in the current COVID situation, I think is clearly receiving another push. Simply mention that social media platforms in particular, and this is kind of the main focus of this part of my work, have had clearly important effects on communication, exchange, and so forth, both on the level of the very intimate and kind of this in the context of a broader public sphere. There are clearly a lot of virulent debates around the power of platforms, and in my previous work, I've been interested quite a bit in search engines, right? And these accusations that we're hearing nowadays, or maybe analyses that argue that indeed there's a real question, particularly when it comes to the effects of algorithmic ranking and recommendation. Those are indeed similar problems that have been asked around search engines for quite a while. Me personally, I'm always interested in this intersection between power and technology, and I think particularly in the context of search engines, this becomes really quite clear. So I've recently published a book called Engines of Order, and that is indeed a bit the theoretical perspective that I have on these questions. And indeed, what has been thematized in the context of search engines has been, I would say, particularly over the last 5 years, been kind of reevaluated or taken up again within the context of online platforms. So particularly recommendation and ranking indeed have been singled out as, well, here for example in this Wall Street Journal article, of driving people to the internet's darkest corners, right? So there's a lot of controversiality around various aspects of platforms, but this in many ways was kind of like my way into the subject, right? So I'm particularly interested in these kind of technical modalities of ordering. And some of this has led to work in the Observatory on the Online Platform Economy, which was created by the European Commission, and I kind of try to calibrate my contribution in this context around these questions of how to study these large online platforms empirically, and together with Jeanette Hoffman we have worked on this concept of observability, right? So what are the conditions under which we are able to actually look, what is happening with large-scale online platforms, and what are potentially the effects that we can describe. So, in this talk, I will refer quite a bit to this idea of indeed studying platforms empirically. Not that I'm want to kind of like create a competition between more conceptual approaches and empirical ones, but I think it's pretty clear that in order to develop our conceptual ideas, we need quite a bit more evidence. In many ways that has become actually more difficult in recent years. So independent access to platform data has really become quite a bit more precarious after what Axel Bruns calls the API collapse that ensued after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where quite a lot of social media services either shut down or reduced data access. So despite these difficulties, what we've been doing together with my colleagues Oscar Coromina and Ariana Matamoros Fernandez, recently joined by our colleague Eric Bora, what we've been doing is to try and develop concrete methodological approaches, and here we are particularly focusing on YouTube. Our work is made possible, in a way by favorable circumstances. I just said that data access has become more difficult over the last years, and we're in a lucky position that we still have a legacy data access token for YouTube's API, which allows us to retrieve really quite a bit of data, and I think you will see this in a moment. But I want to talk a bit about the start and the evolution of this project, and then work my way towards kind of where we're currently at, and the work we've been doing the most recently. Our starting point was indeed that search component, right? That more technical questioning about how does ranking work on YouTube. As you may know, YouTube has really become is very well known to be the second most used search engine. It's one of the most visited pages on the web. So its search function really has quite some significance. And YouTube, other than being important and us having good data access conditions, has really been also a bit singled out in terms of its political significance recently, right? So there's been a lot of discussion about the emergence of particularly far-right extremist content on YouTube, and that's another reason to give that platform some attention. But simply, we've also been very interested in the continuing development of YouTube into really this kind of like huge repository for not just small amateur videos, but increasly very professional business, right? So this element of industrialization is really something that interests quite a lot, right? And from a conceptual perspective, what one can indeed ask, where does YouTube sit within what Andrew Chadwick has called a hybrid media system, or here in Cunningham and colleague talk about an emerging new screen ecology. Where is YouTube in that configuration? I have already, over 5 years ago, built a small set of tools that allow for data access to the YouTube platform. So in a sense, there was really already quite a bit of experience to build on, and indeed we started using these tools to look into particular queries. So our methodology started from the idea that in order to look at search ranking, we first have to answer the question whether what kind of stability that ranking has in the first place. And that really became the starting point of the methodology for this first empirical approach to studying YouTube. What we did is we selected a number of queries and then simply submitted them every day at the same time to YouTube via the API, looking at the particular videos and their overall position in the rankings for these 7 weeks. We then used a series of methodologies, particularly visualization, to analyze the data we have found. And here you can see a tool that came in handy for this kind of work. Each column here, and maybe we're gonna zoom in a little bit. Each column here, is represents 1 day of YouTube videos in response to our particular query. And you can see that the top video is also on the top here, and we can observe kind of movement that emerges over time. So we also try to quantify this kind of work using a metric developed by William Weber and colleagues, a rank bias distance, which allows us indeed to thematize and describe the degree of change between 2 days, and from there being able to average that and so forth. So here we have 3 examples for 7 weeks of YouTube, 3 queries. The Gamergate controversy on the top was already quite stale when we did this research in summer 2016, so relatively little change. The Syria query, which is in second place here, shows what we've called then kind of a mixed pattern that moves between a more like newsy situation where a lot of new videos come in, and this more stable ranking patterns where we find videos that have more views and that have a kind of like this staying power over time then. And at the bottom we have the obligatory Trump query, where we see a lot of change. There was no video that stayed in here. We have the top 20, right? There was no video that stayed within the top 20 for more than 4 days within our observation period. So kind of to summarize that what I just said, the first kind of result of this research was to identify 3 kinds of ranking morphologies. Stable over long periods of time, where also we have low change values, stable with newsy interruptions, and then fully newsy queries that change constantly. We were also able to connect these changes to a number of things. Stable periods in particular were associated with, for example, explainer videos or large comedy channels, and it was particularly during more newsy periods when more YouTube native content was able to pierce the top 20. But the way we approached these things was not uniquely or not only by looking at data analysis, data retrieval, but we looked quite a bit at the videos themselves, looking behind the queries, and it's clear that there is a certain platform vernacular that really plays an important role, but it also intersects with what we call then subject vernaculars, right? That are really specific to the type of a query. So for example, behind the Syria query, we found a genre of video that was really quite strange. We came to call it war porn. It was videos that simply showed war machinery, right? Big weapons firing and shooting without actually showing, for example, casualties. Now simply war machine in operation, right? And this kind of content, yeah, is an example for a subject vernacular. There was some pretty clear correlation between kind of different cycles, right? So we looked at the number of videos published per day during our period, and then we also looked at a search volume, which one can access through Google Trends, and there is indeed quite some correlation between a rise in videos published for a certain query, in searches, and then in the level of changiness as measured by a rank biased distance. But what also came out of this first project was that ultimately in a complex socio-technical system like YouTube, it becomes almost impossible to isolate the technical principles from the user practices. And this kind of led us to move from the concept of ranking algorithms to that of ranking cultures. Ranking cultures in this case is a concept that is supposed to explain that ranking is a distributed outcome, right? That includes technical features, that includes user appropriations, and then all kinds of dynamics that emerge. So technical factors, vernaculars, and the particularities of the individual subject really have to be taken into account. And we saw more and more that in order to actually understand not just the ranking system in its technicality, but in terms of what kind of character it has, what it produces, that we have to look at what it ranks, right? What is being put to the front, and indeed, we move towards this idea that we simply cannot distinguish easily between technical and social factors here, right? And that in general prompted us to interrogate more and more that concept of an algorithm or a singular algorithm, right? Ian Bogost in 2015 stated that concepts like algorithm have become sloppy shorthands, slang terms for the act of mistaking multi-part complex systems for simple singular ones, right? So there's really kind of like a technical argument that simply, in a machine learning situation, user signals, of course, are important, but there's also a much wider infrastructure of technicities that also come in play. So even if we could isolate technical factors, they would also be very, very complex. And in a sense, our method in general already wasn't so much focused on simply saying, here are the patterns, but indeed on looking at outcomes. And this led us to this idea that in the end, what we're interested in is the state of the full system, right? So how does all of this together work? And from there, we started thinking, so how could we develop our methodology further? What indeed can we study and what can we say empirically about something like YouTube? What kind of knowledge can we generate? And these questions led to a second approach, a second project possibly, which seeks to address, because it's ongoing, that rather naive question: what is on YouTube? What is there that is being ranked in the first place? And for media scholars in the past, to be able to say what kind of media products are out there was never easy, of course, but much easier than today, right? If you look at the limited number of newspapers and magazines that are being published, the limited number of television chains or networks that used to exist. In many ways, media content used to be observable. It used to be possible to simply say, yeah, this is what is currently being published. And that question becomes very difficult on a system the size of YouTube. And what we set out to do was to say, okay, let's try and say something about the system on the whole, the platform on the whole. And of course, we then wanted to connect these questions to specific sub-elements. For example, the themes that are being made available, the structures that we can find, possibly user reception, appropriation, monetization. Of course, is a very important subject, and so forth. So there's a whole series of follow-up questions that emerge here. We indeed started again from this notion of a hybrid media system, but then if the hybrid media system is basically a hybridization between closed platforms on the one side, more open systems like the web on the other, and then that kind of carpet or assemblage that emerges from there, we focusing more and more on YouTube, we started to notice that within something like YouTube, a large number of channels congregate, developing their own structure, their own forms of connectivity, their own thematic focuses, and so forth. And this is how that term platform media system started to emerge, right? Where we move from the outside and the connectivity between a platform and other elements to the inside, looking at how or kind of like what emerges here, right? And it's clear that in this sense, the platform again is kind of this co-production between what one could call the platform governance through algorithm interfaces, policies that YouTube engages in on the one side, and then user appropriations on the other side. And users in this case, being actually a wide variety of actors, from end users to advertisers, content creators, and so forth. Indeed, I mean, one of the kind of more theoretical perspectives here, again represented by Benjamin Bratton, is the question of centralization and decentralization within that, to be able to think about indeed how we can distribute and then investigate the roles between, on the one side, the platform governance and then the user appropriations. And indeed, that term, a technical economic system that Bratton uses, I think, is really quite important, since YouTube from almost the beginning, right, started to share revenue, advertisement revenue with content creators, and that economic component is clearly very, very important when it comes to explaining why that platform media system looks how it looks and why these channels dominate over others. We drew on a series of theoretical frameworks. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but that is clearly an important component. Critical media industries is there to account a bit for the economic elements, and we were particularly interested in elements of globalization as well, since YouTube is really populated quite a bit also by non-English language content in particular. In this kind of research, we often also look at the historical evolution. This is a screenshot from the Wayback Machine of the first capture that they have from 2005, when YouTube was still a dating site, but indeed relatively quickly, a more is a kind of more familiar video-centric perspective emerged. And as I already said before, and a really important component of YouTube is revenue sharing, and that is really something that that already came in 2007. Normally, with the well-known distribution of 45% for YouTube and 55 for creators. And indeed, I mean, last year was or this year, Google for the first time talked about advertisement revenue for last year, right, for 2019, and that's about 15 billion. So for the first time, we kind of know where all of these kind of advertisements that we see on when we use YouTube, where what that amounts to. Maybe important just to say that this is not all of YouTube's revenue, simply the ad revenue, right? So there's still quite a bit. There's still many question marks. So we in general in this kind of work look also structurally at the kind of market relationships that form around here, and particularly to then inspire the methodology and look what we can maybe say about forms of industrialization and the emergence and evolution of economic relationships, and therefore also what is happening on the platform in a larger sense. That very quickly leads to looking more thoroughly at the relationship that a company like YouTube has with the video creators. And this is an overview of this 4-tiered system: graphite, opal, bronze, silver, and up, depending on subscriber numbers, and channels indeed to have certain perks, certain possibilities that are added, that are given to them as they rise in ranks. And we also used these categories to actually talk then empirically about our findings. One of the questions indeed that plays an important role in what we're interested in here is that a monetization component, and one aspect of that is indeed that functionalities change over the years, right? That also means that when looking empirically at the data, maybe we have to treat older data differently because simply the platform has moved on in between. So the join function is one of the examples for what changed. The join functions a bit like other crowdfunding models, like Patreon, but it's now integrated into YouTube's interface. You can have storefront on YouTube. So these looking into the evolution of the platform from this kind of perspective really gives you the kind of background knowledge and awareness that I think allows one to calibrate then their own empirical methodology. There are many other topics that one has to engage in some, in researching a bit on the outside, right? Banning is of course a really important practice, deplatformization. But we were also quite interested in looking a bit at these intercultural components, and indeed YouTube uses can diverge quite a bit between obviously individuals already. Particular groups within a country, but then also between countries. But to move on from there towards our actual methodology for the second part or the second project, so trying to create an image of the overall state of YouTube as a platform, there would be several approaches one can take, maybe something going through random sampling. This is something that's possible with Twitter, but indeed is is impossible when it comes to YouTube. So we turned to some of the oldest web studies techniques out there. Crawling, right? So there's a long tradition of crawling the web, trying to say something about the platformed media system that forms there. And there have been attempts to build crawlers and to do crawling-based research for YouTube. The YouTube data tools, for example, have a feature for that, but there are also others out there. We also looked, of course, at existing approaches to trying to create this overall picture of a platform. But those are certainly very interesting, but they also have some limitations. So in the end, what we came up with was a breadth first crawl. So it goes broad before it goes deep, with a subscriber cutoff, starting from a single seed until no more channels were discovered. I don't want to go into the details of that. I think we discussed the advantages and limitations of that methodology quite a bit in the attached paper, and maybe just a single epistemological comment here. In many ways, I think a project like this almost has to use an exploratory approach. Of course, we're developing research questions already before calibrating the methodology, but with a data set like this, a very, very large number of YouTube channels, we will always be surprised by the data, and I think an inductive approach really makes sense here. So in terms of the outcome of that crawling approach, we were able to collect data for 36 million YouTube channels. There is a certain level of a certain hierarchy of confidence in our results. I think we probably succeeded pretty well in getting the top of the pyramid. So particularly the subscriber numbers, the channels that sit above a subscriber number of 10,000 and 100,000 are probably quite close to being exhaustive. And as we go below, we are a little bit less confident. Most of the things, most of the analysis that we applied focused on what we called monetizable YouTube. Those are channels that have more than 1,000 subscribers, and that's the cutoff when YouTube allows you to start running ads, and that's 4.4 million channels above the threshold of 1,000 subscribers. A very first approach was simply to say, let's look at quantitative distributions, and maybe here just two highlights from that work. It's very clear that in terms of subscriber numbers, but also in terms of videos produced, in terms of view numbers, that the platform media system that YouTube hosts is really highly unequal. The elite channels of our sample, which are above 100,000 subscribers, it's only 0.4% of our full sample, but they have 69% of all subscriptions and receive 62% of all views. And if we move another step up to the 15,000 channels that have more than 1 million subscribers, they still account for 37% of subscribers and 37% of the views, right? So we really see that we have a pretty strong level of hierarchization. We also looked into topics that was particularly interesting from this question, what is on YouTube, and indeed there's quite a bit of entertainment, lifestyle, music and gaming, and much less of other content. During that project, that part of the project where we relied on YouTube's automatic content classification a system, we also noticed that there are some real problems with that. And one of the follow-up projects that we're going to do based on this data is to try and come up with alternative modes of description of topicality on YouTube. I think one of the most interesting sets of findings that come out of this work are connected to the cultural dimension and the international dimension, particularly of YouTube. So most channels, and particularly the larger channels, have a country code attached to them, and that allows us to bring country into focus. And this chart, I think, already shows quite a number of interesting things. It I think shows, first of all, the dominance of the US in terms of channels, but also particularly it shows that if we compare the channel count with number of subscribers and views, that the US and actually other English language countries are quite successful in kind of like doing better than one would expect. So with fewer channels actually receive more subscribers and more views, and also producing fewer videos than one would expect, right? So in terms of industrialization and size, we see that US channels are really quite a bit bigger than others. And that story, has quite a bit of nuance to it. But I think another interesting finding is we looked into two metrics here. I'm gonna zoom in. One we called like ratio, which is simply the relationship between likes and dislikes on YouTube, and the second one here on the horizontal axis, we called intensity, which is the relationship between views and engagement, in the sense that we call a video more intense if the ratio between views and comments, likes, dislikes, and so forth is high. So in this case, we see, for example, that Brazil, which in general is a big outlier in our data set, is not only a more positive country with the highest like ratio, but also has a very, very high intensity. Whereas then countries like India, Pakistan, but also Vietnam have much more negative kind of relationship between liking and disliking, and also much less in intensity, right? So there is maybe a possibility for kind of like intercultural reception studies on a very high level of granularity that emerges from these kind of data sets. Just a real quick an attempt to look at the network between channels, right? Since it's a crawl, we were looking particularly how channels are linked to each other. That's the starting point of our data set, and I think here visualization doesn't really make all that much sense, at least not at this level of size here. But maybe just one highlight: the light blue on the upper right corner is again Brazil, and we indeed see that Brazil is actually more disconnected than any of the larger countries here from the core of YouTube, which is very much organized around US-based and English language channels. So we tried to make this a little bit more readable, looking at how country and language structure that network of channels. So we reduced all of the connections between countries to a single connection, and then we started plotting the top three connections here, and you can see there's a lot of focus on US channels and channels that don't have a country flag, which are very often also large English language channels. But taking out these two top nodes here, we come to this like second layer of cultural relationships, and they are very much, I think you can see here very easily, they're very much based on language affinity. You can, for example, see that French-speaking countries link particularly to French channels from France. Interesting maybe that for Spanish we really actually have like two main nodes, Mexico and Spain. And these kind of patterns, I think, are maybe not surprising, but they indeed show, on the one side the dominance by English language and US channels, and then kind of these second tier hierarchies that emerge. Looking into the relationship between countries within this network from maybe a more structural perspective, we looked into homophily as the level of like same love, right? So do particular countries have a tendency to link more to the channels from the same country or not, right? And we did that on both like an incoming and outcoming basis. And again, we see Brazil here being actually the most shut off country in terms of incoming and outcoming homophily, and then particularly smaller English language countries being very, very diverse both in incoming and outcoming relationships. So these kind of structures, they need much more time to interpret thoroughly, but hopefully they show some methodological starting points for looking at a platformed media system. I've already mentioned a couple of times that we are particularly interested in monetization, questions of industrialization, professionalization, and this is I think our current focus point. So this is for the work on hopefully the next paper already. As a starting point, we looked, for example, into things like video length, right? And video length is particularly interesting from a monetization standpoint because the way that ads are being placed depends on the length of the video, particularly how many ads, right? And over the last years, in particular, this kind of like sweet spot at somewhat over 10 minutes has emerged, and we can see that over time, videos are really approaching this, getting longer, and we can observe that quite clearly. Secondly, we're also looking into the hyperlinks that we can find in video descriptions, and here we looked at the number of outgoing links to Patreon, right? 2019, we don't have the full data set, so it's a little bit lower. But as the advertising rules and policies and also mistakes and problems on YouTube are getting more complicated, it's clear that video creators are looking for alternative income streams. So our next step in this project is going to be looking at monetization and optimization tactics, particularly employed by it's kind of like elite of YouTube channels. Industrialization, in the sense of cultural industries, is going to be a focus point, and we'll also be looking into alternative ways for content classification. A lot of that research is going to focus on, or is currently already focusing on, the contents and the links in particular that we find in video descriptions. So over 90% of the videos where we received data have links in them, and in some cases, there are quite a number of them. And links have always been trails and traces, right? So they're pathways for navigation, but they are also traces for us to look into. And if we look, for example, for a simple distribution of domain names, we find unsurprisingly a lot of links going to YouTube, but then also Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and these unsurprising large social media services that really play an important role in this assemblage of attempts for creators to be successful, to create an audience and so forth. But then we also find quite quickly links to other possibilities for money making, right? So for example, Amazon affiliate links, Patreon links, but also merchandise stores and so forth. So this is really where we're currently at with this kind of research, and we hope to have maybe a bit more worked out results soon. But this brings me already to the conclusion, although I've probably talked for quite some time. So what I wanted to do here is a bit to present work that has begun 5 years ago and has kind of evolved, right? It very much starts from this idea that platformization has really changed the web, and that means it changes how we study it. Over these last 5 years of YouTube research, data access has really become a battleground for establishing and guaranteeing the observability of platforms. And given their enormous importance, not just political, but also in everyday life, this is really a question that is hard to overestimate. So what I've discussed here is are some of the first steps towards painting a picture of a large-scale platform media system that already employs quite a number of approaches. Some of them empirical, some of them maybe kind of based on more of like a background analysis. But it's still very very selective, right? And indeed one of the challenges here in something like this is in order to get a grip on something like YouTube, we really need a variety of methodological approaches to come together. On the one side, of course, to deal with this complex socio-technical integration, right? That was really what came out of this first project that looked into a ranking where it's becoming very very difficult to distinguish between like technical and social factors, but then also simply the growing internal complexity of that platform media system, in the sense that channels are becoming bigger, the platform is becoming more complex in technical terms. More actors are pushing in there, multi-channel networks, for example, but also this increasingly large network of complementers for merchandising, for crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and so forth. I think that in many ways we can still think, at least conceptually, about that broader interaction between the attempts at platform governance that we see from the side of companies like YouTube, by technology such as building interfaces, recommender systems, and so forth. Policies, of course, right? They've got terms of service, business models. So these two elements, technology, policy, on the one side, already are pretty complex. A large company that does a lot of things, has a lot of different interfaces, interacts with a lot of different constituencies. But then still we have on the other side the appropriations by users, which indeed are also quite an eclectic group. So we can still hold that a little bit apart, at least in our analysis. When it comes to looking at the inside of this platformed media system, which is large, is really developing its own like character, its own structures. The way we've approached it so far has been looking at popularity in particular, hierarchies in terms of visibility, in terms of exposure, but then topicality, and here we want to go further than YouTube's own classification system, and in the future maybe develop machine learning based approaches to mapping these topic spaces more thoroughly. And then third, language affinity was really also a key element that paints a certain picture of what Cunningham and colleagues have called media globalization, where indeed, the first set of results, they really point on the one side to the dominance of US-based channels and actually other English language countries playing an important role as well, but that then being balanced by a complex and again stratified system of non-English language channels that maybe produce their own dynamics and their own media systems within the media system. And finally, I think we're noticing when looking at a lot of other data sets that YouTube plays this kind of like central role as hub for video content online, right? So there's a lot of linking towards YouTube from the web and other services, but YouTube then also reaches back into the web again through hyperlinks, thereby kind of connecting the platform media system back to what Andrew Chadwick has called the hybrid media system. And out of this kind of emerges a complex landscape that we are trying to make sense of, even if it's not always easy. Thanks a lot for paying maybe attention to what I've been rambling about. So sorry if maybe the pathway towards narrating this kind of work is a little bit meandering, but I thought that it's also maybe interesting for others to see how this approach to studying a platformed media system indeed has evolved and led from one methodological step to the next, each time learning and each time adding maybe a new perspective to our arsenal. Thanks a lot, and good luck to you all.